because today we are going to be talking about the different types of consumer fraud. That is, fraudulent activities made by the consumer using different tools and technologies which are there for the consumer, using legislation which is there for the consumer. That is, misusing the available tools and instruments. Normally everyone loves to talk about how the market is working badly, how unhappy the customer is, but let's look at the other side of the coin as well. And there are lots of technologies, there are a lot of cases of fraudulent activities like this. And if we take this activity as a whole, the whole market suffers. Both those consumers acting in good faith and citizens whose identity is being stolen. So it's not purely economic, not purely financial, but also a social one, a social issue, because there are problems arising out of those fraudulent activities can be very serious. We have three representatives of the market today as panelists: Alexander Akhlomov, CCPO of JuicyScore, Lyudmila Gribak, Chairman of the Board, Regional Association of Pawn Shops, and Ivan Marinov, CEO of SMS Finance. But another panelist today is representative of the law enforcement, head of the operational search unit from the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, General Administration in St. Petersburg, Stanislav Romanchuk. So we'll be trying to take a look at this topic from all the angles, and since we have law enforcement officers here, we'll be talking about how the system reacts. We're having an open discussion today, just like this convention is. So my first question is quite logical, and I will be asking the panelists very simply: how does it happen? How often does it happen? How bad it is? What activities we're currently discussing? Could you please describe it? Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for coming. What is fraud? Fraud can be different. Social fraud, IT fraud, technology fraud, internal fraud. But it is aimed at inflicting damage, financial damage, to the consumer and the company. So, ranging from the easiest to the more complex, I will talk about the different aspects. Take anti-collectors. Is this fraud? No, these are just people using loopholes in legislation. They promise everyone to get them rid of debt and just pumping out money out of the consumer without bringing them anything. This is fraud, but it is not too acute. Next comes the identity fraud. People who allegedly took up a loan, they suffer. And of course, it is a lender who suffers because the money never gets back to him. Next, we have the consumer fraud, or extremist consumers. Say Money Funny or Domashnie Деньги companies, which are problematic. So the consumers suddenly stop repaying their debt.
So this is an outright social fraud, and the most dangerous and intimidating fraud is related to IT, online and offline alike. If you allow me, I'll tell you about one case we encountered in January, or rather we as an MFI market encountered that in January. The level of fraud in our organization is 0.7%. It's low, actually, and we are looking at micro upswings when there are patterns or consecutive telephone numbers in the applications, or same emails or identical emails or date of birth and so on. And in January, we pinpointed the upswing activity of one man, as we thought, who tried to hack our security system. First time we fenced him off and created a special constructor which is operating until the moment when scoring points come into play. Much to our amazement, in February, a swindler managed to bypass our construct and took several loans from us. We scrutinized that, blocked it, retrofitted the constructor, and identified the number of cards to use, real credit cards to which the money was credited. Then the swindler turned around his behavior, started using electronic purses instead of credit cards. Such a behavior is not typical for a rank-and-file fraudster who can take 5 or 6 loans altogether. So we scrutinized that fraudster. We put together a task force, and we found out that a well-organized professional hackers group is attacking us. We've looked through the patterns of behavior, identified the e-purses, evaluated the damage, created a special construct, and frankly speaking, we found out that the total turnover on those electronic purses amounts up to more than 100 million rubles. 100 million ruble. So the number of fake drops is 4,000 or 6,000. The damage was incurred by all the MFIs. I reiterate, all of them, period. The scope is shattering. It's the largest profile fraud case I've ever encountered in my whole life, and it's the largest case and the most formidable case for MFI. We had to collect full evidence. We had to track it down, where and who and how. We did all the forensics. Colleagues from JuicyScore will tell us how it all was happening. Can you imagine? You are just a commonplace consumer, and your personal data is pumped out. It's in the market. The telephone number could be different, so the whole list is created of databases of customers with their date of birth and personal security number, family patronymics, and everything. They look through, and the microfinance company is looking at the track record list. They have got all good track records as real people, so they disburse money. Without state-of-the-art anti-fraud solutions, we won't be able to do anything about it. It's not very simple. A swindle, like just the wrong picture is glued from the real passport, but this is a very big jeopardy to the market. Well, great for the starters. Now, let's try to make this segregation. Well, it's common knowledge that the case you're referring to is about organized criminal group which initially and intentionally put together those efforts, counterfeited the data, conned citizens. But it's common knowledge that in the market, apart from such a swindle of MFIs, there are also consumers who, due to some reasons, find out that something is going on in this company. There was one case when the consumers came to know that the company was hacked, they sent an application that they will not return the loan because their database was wrongly used, or they just reconsidered and they don't want to repay the loan. That means that they are being sly and they are going to con MFIs. That's another fraud as well. But how can we compare the shattering scope of that? Well, very good question. Thank you. Frankly speaking, we thought that social default was this most formidable thing, because it's common knowledge that MFIs are always absorbing very high risks, and there are lots of past dues and NPLs vis-a-vis banks, so it's incomparable. But nonetheless, if you structure a scoring system, an intent model in a good way, that intent model can tell you not only whether the customer will repay the loan or whether he'll get another loan from you, and actually what would be the maturity, when will he pay, or will you have to refer to collection agency services. This model saves off all the non-good faith borrowers, and typically such customers end up in low cohorts. It's not those prime customers getting, let's say, 30 to 50,000 per one loan, but rather several thousand. If you figure out that you were attacked like that, you just limit the volumes of the loans. But actually, you have got those systems and collection agencies working with normal, so to put it, customers. We, at the moment of the customer's entry, when the customer gives us the information about his mobile telephone number and if the mobile app is there, so before we onboard such a client, we can see whether he has got an application with anti-collector. If you opened just Yandex and Uber, actually, we know how to see whether they have got anti-collector application on their gadget. This level is not very high of such frauds. This is quite unpleasant, but it's more about recovery, debt recovery, about collection of the debt. But in most instances, however strange it might be, most of our customers are quite good people. But it's 0.76% fraud if we disburse 60,000 to customers monthly. So you may figure out what it would be, 0.76% of that. Yes, and there are lots of collection agencies. In case of unscrupulous actions, actually, you might be helped by those agencies. So customers could be different. They're not all good faith customers. For me, it was like an eye-opener to find out that the Lombards, the pawn brokerage companies, have all cases of fraud nonetheless. What's your story? Yes, I've been listening to colleagues like 100 million ruble damage for MFIs for Lombard. For pawn brokerage, it's unthinkable because we work offline, first of all, and customers always will have to come along to pawn shop. So they always have a collateral, and we have this collateral, so it's very seldom when we encounter this type of fraud. Let's say if we open up a new spin-off of the company, then fraudsters come along with fake jewelry. Mostly I'll refer to fake golden and diamond jewelry, because most of the pawn shops are jewelry pawn shops. And also they would try to see as whether the specialist sitting at the desk is well versed in gold and so on. Sometimes it's lead covered by gold, a gold leaf. Sometimes it's a thick layer of gold, sometimes very thin layer of gold, but nonetheless, it is possible and very simple using hydrostatics, to say nothing about Archimedes' law, to find out whether it's gold or not. If you place this piece of jewelry into water, you'll find this out immediately. And now that's the simplest way. The fraud of our customers, when our customers come along, get the loan against this collateral, they walk around, they come back a couple of hours later, and they say, you have given us counterfeited money. Those 1,000 banknotes you've given us are counterfeit money. This is possible to verify everything because there is video recording, audio tracking as well. There are camera surveillance directed at customers and the clerks at the desk. So in front of the camera, you should out loud mention this amount of money you've provided the customer with against his or her collateral. So there should be video surveillance and audio tracking as well. Another type of fraud is when customers, they pop in, they leave a piece of jewelry, get money, then they show up half a year later, and they say after half a year that it's not their jewelry because it's not real jewels, but grown diamonds, it's not real gold, and they write a written complaint on the director, and they say you're returning us the piece of jewelry which is not ours, but all could be proven by audio and video tracking. A short while ago we had a hilarious case when the customer pledged not his own asset, and in several pawn shops he pledged somebody else's assets, and he got mixed up which piece of jewelry was in which pawn shop. So finally we had to turn to the owner, who admitted that it is his assets and nothing was muddled up here. But this is a different story. It's nothing vis-a-vis your large fraud, yes, but nonetheless, I have a question for law enforcement representative. Those little pranks Ludmila referred to with her pawn shop customers, should they be criminally liable? Is there elements of the crime? Is there a corpus delicti in what they do? Let's say there is an organized criminal group stealing and intentionally swindling the organizations. Or another thing is the consumer, he was mistaken or reconsidered, decides not to pay. Come up with the legal evaluation of that. What's the difference in between, and is it criminal libel act? Thank you very much, Ivan, for your terminology. Actually, we have got our own terminology in law enforcement world. Everything which is related to disposition of property legally is liable to Article 159 and its Criminal Libel Act. As to what Ludmila said, this is fraud, but of course it should be a case-by-case deliberation, but it's a breach of law, of course. So it's necessary to turn a complaint to the prosecutor's office, to law enforcement agencies, and to bring an action to the court, criminal court, versus such persons indulging in illegal activities. And a criminal act falling under 159 article with inflicting the damage and significant damage not less than 5,000 rubles, and everything in comparative numbers, how big the damage was for the person against which this criminal act was acted. And actually, there is Article 250 when it's big amounts of money embezzled, and especially large, it's more than $1 million. So you can figure out those thresholds from which the criminal liability comes along. If, as Ludmila says, the damage of the lender or pawnbroker company is between 250, starting from 250,000. It's a large damage, and of course, this is the case for law enforcement bodies. And well, as to Article 159, it's malicious intent. If we try to disintegrate those who deliberately, intendedly first indulged in criminal act on identity theft, it's not just about this amount of money, but deliberate intent, malicious intent, first of all. And another thing is that when the customer reconsidered to repay their debt, it's not a prank, like we say, but due to some reasons he is not paying back. Is there any difference from the legal standpoint? Or both fall under fraud, and depending on the amount, ends in different categories? Of course not. As to the fraud, corpus delicti is rather complex. It's difficult to prove the malicious intent. That's bottom line in the situation when a group of persons, unidentified group of persons using state-of-the-art technologies, arranged a sophisticated scheme on pilferage of money. Of course, an action should be brought to the prosecutor's office, to law enforcement agencies, so that the investigation should start. It's very difficult to come up with a judgment without specific information on this or that case, in order to judge as whether it's an fraud or some other criminal act. But it's common knowledge that the fraud is considered to be fully identified since the moment or when the claim was brought to the court, and another moment is since the moment of disposition of that property in question. How often do people refer to you? I don't mean statistical information. I don't think you have it, but are there any cases like that in your practice? As to those pawn shop cases or MFI cases, it's not so often they turn to us and complain that they have been swindled. It's mostly customers, households who turn to us and complained about being swindled because it was identity theft. When those people didn't provide for their personal information and didn't ask for a loan, but it was their identity theft. Of course, sometimes those citizens could be sly or they were getting some loans before, and now they're trying to mislead the law enforcement bodies. But it's necessary to bring a complaint to the prosecutor's office, to law enforcement bodies when the damage was inflicted. Major question for law enforcement people.
Yes, that's true. My question was about how do we organize an interaction between the MFI and the law enforcement after we have evaluated or put together the corpus delicti. We know, we have identified the people. We know what they do on the internet. And after we've tried to file a claim and a complaint with the police, we've been asked if it concerns only Novosibirsk. We said it's nationwide. Then the local station, the local police station, and said this is not their responsibility. We should be contacting central police department. We see that we were not only not the only victims of the fraud I've been telling you about. Literally every online MFI has suffered from this fraud. They have the same case, even those I thought were not impacted. Well, first of all, we need to have a complaint filed with the police if this is the Novosibirsk department. You should be filing it with the central department in Novosibirsk and finding out where those hackers sit. This should be done by the law enforcement of the respective region. So this is responsibility of the internal workflows of the law enforcement, how they proceed against those hackers. All right, so this does not. This should not be a big deal for the victim. So it is the victim of a fraud who should be filing this complaint with the police, not someone else. And so if the law enforcement officers do not react, you should be following the law 59 and contact higher ranked police department. All right. We've been talking about things like identity fraud, people who left their passport data in a hotel or in a car-sharing company, but these are not the most high-profile criminal cases. The highest-profile criminal cases have to do with IT technologies, with hackers attacking MFIs. My question to Alexander: how large is this, so to say, market of embezzlement or market of the identity data? What happens, and you as a company providing protection from those things, how do you evaluate? What do you think about this, and what are the methods we could use to fight those attempts off? Thank you very much. We are a technology company providing help to online loan market players. In 9 countries, we help fight off fraud. There are several paradigms we are following and trying to get a law in the market that non-personal alternative data should be used. All the data we used cannot serve as direct identifiers for a user. Identification is one of the main issues for MFIs, and since we are not dealing with personal data, personally identifiable data, we use the term of authentication. The device which logged the loan application should be verified, and the virtual user of the device, because we are never interested in what the name of the user is. We need to authenticate his device. We have 26 technologies for authentication. We analyze over 50,000 data points from every device. Hardware analysis, network connection analysis, software analysis. And ethics of data collection is also a big issue. We commit to never ever analyze private messages, like the email messages, or private contacts. Why is this measure very efficient to prevent fraud? Because forging 5 to 10 data points in an application is much easier than forging or faking 50,000 data points for a device. But, well, there are professionals like this able to carbon copy any device. That's it. So first of all, we fight off technical fraud. These are exactly the attempts to copy a device or use a stolen device or use specific software posing as a new device. These are network connection manipulations, VPNs, proxying, or other methods, an attempt to hide the source of an application, the origin of the application. We have several customers in Russia and other countries as well, and we see applications made from different devices, from different IP addresses. In the case which was elaborated by Ivan, where we could help, these were 2 things. We were able to locate the origin of the fraud using a zombie server. Applications were sent using a zombie server outside of Russian Federation, connected to several zombie devices, sending application. And where we also can help, we see applications coming to different market players, and generally speaking, the damage from this case was really huge, and every market player suffered. So we could aggregate all those applications and analyze the trends, the fraud trends. So we offer technologies like real IP detection, device detection, so we are mostly specialized in technology. Another thing is that we analyze a lot of data for anti-fraud and risk management as a whole. And you have to have specific data sets. We're not alone in the market, we should admit that. Every other player also uses alternative data to identify fraud, which will be very hard to identify if we used only the personal data. If we see a lot of application using same personal data made through different devices, we are also able to raise a red flag here. If you wish, I can go into detail on how we do this. And we also provide a lot of useful data to the market players to identify patterns and risk levels, even if we just talk about the different credit scores and risks, not fraudsters. We also do understand that personal data are useful, but using the personal data, excessive use or misuse of personal data is very dangerous for people and for companies. This data are very easy to compromise. So using non-personal data is safer for every party in the process. I have a question here. We receive data, you say, but we don't look at personal messages. There is a specific ethics. But I'm sure people sitting here are concerned about this, like citizens, because we leave a lot of digital footprints in the internet. And as far as I understand, you, as part of your daily work, as part of your daily scoring, you use this huge array of data, of those fingerprints people leave on the internet. And currently there is no legislation limiting your activities in this. And I'm sure your company is behaving ethically, but there could be other companies as well, and which use the data in a totally different way. What do you think? It's maybe outside of the scope of today's session, but I would like to ask what do you think about regulating the collection and usage of non-personalized data today? But you do understand that using those non-personal data, you are still able to identify the person using modern technologies. What do you think as a company protecting other market players from fraud? And what can be done for regulating it? Yes, I do agree that this is a very acute issue. And the first part of your question was how far regulation or certifications are needed. This is correct. We agree data should be certified, at least. And the second part about ethics and what we use and how honest are we as a player. It's naturally that no one admits using the data incorrectly. But we were able to prove that because we use Open API. New market players see not only the data set we output in a response vector, but we also show them a script, if we speak about a JavaScript, or a mobile library, which is used to collect the data. So everyone can look at our methods of collection. Since we also have banks as our customers, the security departments of the banks have very strict regulations, so we were able to answer all of the questions. The next thing is data storage. Our data are non-personal, but all the data are still stored in Russia, according to the current legislation. So, what could be the practical steps for regulation of the data collection? We understand that the leak of personal data merged with other data is the reason of the most serious frauds. We have proven that in most cases non-personal data is enough to make a decision on granting or non-granting a loan. I can show you an example of that. We process events or actions, like a very simple thing having a different time zone on the device, different from the IP address, or having another language installed on the device. This is a high risk factor, having a 90% risk for this application. Do you need any personal data from this applicant? No, you don't. You just reject the application. Well, and if this mismatch is this mismatch a reason for the consumer to complain about the decision of the company? If this happened, this does not apply only in microfinancing institutions, but also the whole financial market. Formally, this is not personal data, so we may only use a proactive or preventive approach here. Another example would be a very complex proxying. If an iPhone has a console open in his phone, there are not many people who were able to do that. Please don't dive too deep into tech details, otherwise we will lose the attention of the people here. But coming back to the practical steps, we totally agree that regulating the usage of personal data should be done and should be more strict. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that a phone and the phone number and the email are personal data as well, because using the data, any financial transaction can be carried out. Using the data we collect, even if the database is stolen, you cannot identify a person, you cannot have a loan using those data we have. So personal data list should be expanded. You also have to define the so-called sensitive data, and the misuse of those sensitive data should be regulated or punished. Everyone keeps telling us that everything is becoming digital and everything can be done remotely, like biometrics, etc., etc. But you should never forget about security and safety, so that we don't have the discussions about fraud like this. Right, thank you. We won't be digging too deep in terms of data. We have professionals here. My question to our panelists first, and next we'll open the Q&A session. The question: the situation is quite clear. This is a criminal offense, but the interaction with the law enforcement does not always succeeds or leads to a positive result. And even an interaction with the law enforcement, if a successful communication with the law enforcement does not always result in compensating for the damages made by the fraud. And so prevention is key to this. So you have to prevent rather than identify who is the fraudster. What can be done to improve the system?
We should streamline legislative requirements. We should take on board some technological solutions, maybe, and also we should do awareness raising related to financial literacy somehow to counter this widely spread phenomenon. rather generic question maybe, but we'll start from Ivan. I'll start from a very straightforward thing, which were referred to as financial literacy, but it's not financial literacy, it's just sort of general awareness raising. We leave our personal information, email numbers, email address, mobile number in different places. Even in this forum, we're authorized. But here, you don't have to worry about it. You won't be swindled at our forum. Well, I'll give you an example. There are so-called non-professional operators of personal data, like hotels, booking.com, something like that. We leave our personal data there, and there's no way of knowing where your personal data will end up. I think that you all receive telephone calls from real estate centers or, let's say, TPL companies, third-party liabilities companies. Don't leave your personal data everywhere. That is very right. Second thing, you should analyze borrower's behavior. Banks should do that. Financial organizations, SRO, and law enforcement bodies should do that. Based on the behavioristic characteristic of a customer, we can find out whether he is a swindler or not. Very simple. Let's say a guy comes along and complains to central bank or Rosfin monitoring supervisor agency by saying, I never got this loan. So in most likelihood, that's the truth. And if you call this guy till infinity and you never get him on the phone, in most likelihood, he is the fraudster. We should identify behavioristic models related to different customers. We should streamline the system of data sharing between different MFIs, between banks, between telecom company having plethora of different data, and between law enforcement bodies, informational security systems. We should have this consolidated database in different form. That way we'll be able to counter all those fraudsters and we'll be able to avoid in future those formidable cases. If we're going to share information between us, that might become available not just to companies with squeaky clean reputation. Do you know who has got access to data on biometrics? First of all, those who are collecting those biometrics data. Very simple case, very primitive case. Let's say a small local bank is shut down by CBR, let's say in a remote town, and there is operator sitting there. So the bank is on the brink of collapse, and the operator is paid some money, he's bribed, and he'll sell you this database. Maybe it's better to share information between us professional participants of the market. Stanislav, have you got any tips for us? Have you got any takeaways for the market players? What's to be done along those lines? I would like to underscore the fact that, of course, as to identity theft, it's a very big problem indeed. It's more for a legislator to identify as a criminal act this type of crime, identity theft. But mindful of this problem in relation to fraudulent actions, looks like one thing is the actually identity theft or a tool of fraud. Actually, it all will be considered, but only when it has been established that the damage was inflicted. first of all, identity theft and using them in some other scheme will entail damage. Then it's more for the legislator, for law enforcement bodies to judge. There we go again, time after time again, like until money is stolen, there is no theft. And as to referrals at an earlier stage, that's very important. It's possible to prevent the criminal offense. But as to making persons liable for criminal offense, that's going to be more challenging to do. Colleagues, more recommendations. Ludmila, I'll recap on that. I fully agree with Ivan. By the same token, pawn brokerage companies should have the problem of data security and data protection. But actually, we have everything regulated because we have a fabulous law on pawn shops, and there is another type of fraud when households just take from individual entrepreneurs or jewelry shops the items to sell. They bring it to the pawn shop, then there is cash gap, they don't have money enough, so at the end of the day there could be withdrawals of those assets and disposition of those assets, not to end up in such a situation from pawn shops. Pawn shops are not allowed to take big batchments of goods to sell. If somebody will bring you 3 kilos of gold, pawn shops are not entitled to do that. Alexander, I'll recap on that as well. Yes, I think we need much sterner regulation of personal data, but we should not go overboard with that. On the other hand, colleagues from Europe may say that no legislation, the way it exists in a Western world, could also sue people for anything which could be related to personal data. IP address in some of the countries is considered to be personal data as well. So we should develop state-of-the-art technologies which allow us not to use this personal data. I'll give you a very straightforward example. When you see that there is the application to buy, let's say, electric coffee pot or playing device, or just, I think the answer is obvious. Is it fraud or not? I'm Kirill Maladrika from High School of Economics. I have got 2 questions. Both are related to telephone communications. Tell me something. Nowadays, very complex and sophisticated ways of customer identification are suggested, but even 20 years back from now, whenever we had any doubts, it was possible to have extra identification using conventional telephone, calling the let's say, the customer, asking some secret question with him. As to, I have been using bank cards for 18 years. Only 3 times I was identified by telephone in relation to that. One was when I flew over to America. After one transaction, my card was blocked. They called me and asked, "Are you really an American now? Do we need those super sophisticated ways of customer identification?" Whereas there are much more straightforward ways of doing that, which we have at our disposal since long way back. Another question. I'm a customer of top 3 largest banks. I will not give you those names because it's not about this or that bank, but they just also hand me over a safety induction, and they're saying, if we call you from this telephone number which is identified on your bank's cards, don't trust us because this telephone is for you to call us, not the other way around. So I have a question. Why even those top 3 countries' banks are not capable of providing their customers with this very straightforward ability so that there could be fraud calls to consumers from their own telephone numbers, which are embossed on the credit card? The answer is obvious to my way of thinking, but nonetheless, let me take it. Using one virtual cyber installed on one computer, and a telephone operator could be bypassed just like that. Telephone identification will fall flat. Any more questions? Alexei Fedoseev from MFI. Well, there are lots of marketplace who have been around the market since long way back. Our session was dedicated to blocking fraudsters at the entry points. All the companies know how to do it. And Victor mentioned the customers who reconsidered. They wanted to pay, then they reconsidered. Oftentimes it's normal customers and with positive behavior. As to the swindlers we block in the first time, that's one thing. So I reiterate, are there any schemes of working with constant customers who reconsider that they don't want to pay? If they thought twice, they decided not to repay. Okay, if the person is sociable and it's possible to call him and he'll answer the phone, he's not a fraudster. He may be in a dire strait. He might seek debt restructuring. There could be a plethora of different reasons for that. Maybe he's over-leveraged, and actually he is in a very difficult situation. No, I mean, let's say those who were actually misled by those companies who offer services on individual bankruptcy procedures. They call potential customers and say, even if you have a loan, we are there to help you not to repay. So some of the customers were sort of bought over by this ad. Have you got the answer? I mean, the panelists, once again, those companies who offer the insolvency procedure to individuals, they are swindling banks and MFIs, and they're swindling the customers. It all depends on different models those companies adhere to, but oftentimes it's way easier for them to con a consumer who comes along and is ready to pay money if they help him to get rid of the loan they got. There are some who were bought into this ad, and actually they are being conned by high-quality professional lawyers who actually help you they say they'll help you to get rid of this loan. Actually, we have got both banking and microfinance organization, and there is a lot more to it than that when you refer to this market. Actually, if it's MFI, it's very small amounts of money in the way of loans. As to the banks, it could be huge. I think that legislative framework should be turned around in Russia. I don't know how it's about you, MFIs, but from the standpoint of banks, I can tell you there was the most high-profile case for Drev Chrome company in the wood logging company. So our loss was 500 million rubles. Altogether, it's more than 2 billion rubles. So only when the banks sent a complaint to CBR and just to prosecutor's office, we disrupted that fraud. What should we do? How should we disrupt the fraudulent actions of such companies offering services to help customers to get rid of the loan, not to pay loans? Actually, there are two stages here. Those companies as companies doing fraudulent insolvency or companies resolution or individuals resolution procedure. First, if customer doesn't pay us and then he gets other loans, 5 or 6 loans from different other banks, the customer is over-leveraged. Of course, there will be this procedure of fraudulent resolution for them. We should do something about it because banks are massively jeopardized by this type of fraud offered by those companies. I would like to give the mic to Iman Mikhteev. Colleagues, there are several different problems with different solutions. You tackled upon the issue of banks being ready for that and willing to do that. Let's say the customer is over-leveraged. There is a law 353. 10 days were provided to actually send a report. Actually, we should track down the customers which are over-leveraged, getting 5 or 6 loans from 5 or 6 different banks. Even the largest state-owned bank, they say we cannot do the due diligence on the customer within 1 day. We need at least 3 days. As to those companies offering customers the resolution procedure, it's very simple in the U.S. You are entitled to charge money only as an access fee, but not as advanced money. So those companies charge money for consultancy services only. So they should be CFP supervised behavioristic supervisor in America.
Let us charge only a success fee for those cases and prohibit them from taking any other fees or commissions. So here we have a problem with how the system works. If this larger state-owned bank tells us that 1 day is not enough to report information to the credit bureau, come on. And then another thing, this thing with the success fee issue, well, we should just have it in the legislation, because currently they say we're providing services which are not restricted, so why bother? Ongsa from Legal and Board. I do not quite agree with my colleague, he said about the low volume. Currently, the Pawn Shops Association has lots of those fake jewelry items, which my colleague was talking about, with an average cost, with an average value of 4.5 thousand rubles. The volume of those fake jewelries is huge. We have established a communication between pawn shops with sites having pictures of those fakes. Both, well, and my question concerns the law enforcement, goes to law enforcement. Is there a limit how far the market players are permitted to share information between each other? We show those items on our website. It's quite obvious that we cannot say that Ivan Ivanov was the one who tried to pledge this item to different pawn shops. But on the other hand, we've shown the item in a social network, this fake item, and we have information there. Well, actually, we all know this guy. We all know his name. Here's the photo. This is the comments we've got in a social network. What is our liability for disseminating or publishing this information? Well, I am representing the Financial Security Department. I believe this is rather a question to the Communication Oversight Service. Unfortunately, the participant is not using a mic. Has there been any case where you're criminally liable at any point of time for sharing this data? Unfortunately, no mic is used. As soon as we published a picture in the social network using the name, we have been indicted in a case, in a court case, where a person tried to prosecute us for sharing his personal data. Do you have an answer to that? Well, we have a civil case here. And this is all about what damage has been inflicted to you. This is about defining the damage and what is the fraud, what are the fraudulent actions. Did he use the personal data? Well, actually, we have 2 minutes left before our session is over. What I would like you, you could ask this question personally, because this goes too much into detail, but we still have time to take one question. Are there any questions? If not, let me sum it up. Could I interrupt you for a moment? I have a comment to what Ilman said concerning data sharing. Speaking about offline, there is a problem that data from the credit bureau need 5 days to be obtained. All other data can be obtained in an online mode, and as soon as the MFI sees that this person has made several applications over the course of the last days, this becomes obvious that it's some sort of a loan shopping. All right, we were talking about fraud today. The topic I thought would be very, very specific turned out to be very broad. And the issue requires a lot more attention. And this does not only concern technology, because we have the tools and professionals to tackle this technology-wise, but there are also issues in related spheres, because digitization and those digital fingerprints not being regulated up until today is something which the microfinancing market, not the biggest market in our country, is not able to solve on their own. But it's obvious that you use the most modern technologies and you are in a trend. So, summing it up as a moderator, what I would like to tell you, this is one of the topics, problematic issues for a normally operating market, which is not present anywhere in the public discussion. This may be problematic because when a customer receives a formal claim to repay a loan, if he did not apply for a loan, he then relates this problem not to the financial market, but rather with the MFI. And this negative perception of the microfinancing market is owed to those problems, to this this means that we have to share our data and publish our data and discuss it openly. I believe there should be a communication strategy in place, a communication with the consumers, which was able to inform the customer on how the market really functions, on what really happens when those issues arise. And we need to inform the customer that those are the criminal actions made not by the microfinance companies, but by some criminals outside of those companies. This is something which needs to be elaborated, because those actions will ensure that fraud is successfully fought off, and this will increase or help regain trust, which is a thing that helps the market to capitalize. Thank you very much for your talk, for your active participation and the discussion. See you.